Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to give my guide on how to help counter Briar, as she has very quickly become a problem champion, despite releasing at like a miserable 30% win rate, and on top of being nerfed in the last patch as well. Briar is still over 50% win rate, not by very much, but she is in a over 50% win rate champion, and she has a lot of tools that can be very difficult for players to deal with. That said, I think that there are quite a few avenues for players to be able to counter Briar, so let's go ahead and talk through some of that today. I'll cover some of the general tips for counterplaying Briar, some specific ability focused things that you can do, and then of course give you guys some counter pick advice. First up, the general counterplay. Briar is an auto-attack oriented high healing champion, which means that anything that works against auto-attacks or healing will be exceptionally valuable against Briar. Thornmail in particular is a very potent item. Even if you're not a full tank, picking one up will dramatically improve your ability to fight her, because not only can she not avoid the grievous wounds, but there's the damage reflection as well, which is doubly important against Briar because she has no base health regeneration. This is also something that we'll touch on a little bit in a little bit as well. Frozen Heart is also a very good item. It decreases her attack speed, which makes her a lot less damaging. If she's damaging you less, she's sustaining for less, and as a result, Frozen Heart can be very powerful against Briar as well. Grievous Wounds are also a must here. Briar is a champion defined by her healing, so Riot expect you to have Grievous Wounds in order to fight her. This is similar to Dr. Mundo or Soraka, where a big portion of their champion identity is the fact that they have lots of healing. If you're not buying Grievous Wounds against Briar, you're not using some of the intended counterplay. Keep in mind as well that you no longer have to finish your Grievous Wounds item in order to get the full effect, so just grab an EC or an Oblivion Orb or a Bramble Vest early on to make sure you have an answer for when Briar comes calling. Briar has a pretty fast and healthy clear as well, so you can expect her to gank early and with most of her HP remaining, or you could expect her in your jungle taking away your camps or trying to fight you. Keep this in mind when you're dealing with Briar in the early stages of the game. She clears very quickly, so unlike a tank jungler who will take some time before they can gank top lane, for example, Briar can be there very quickly and with a lot of her health remaining. A huge part of Briar's kit as well is around controlling her while she's self-taunted, but this means that she has a few obvious weaknesses. While she's taunted, she can't juke back and forth to dodge incoming skill shots, she'll just run straight at her target, and she taunts onto the nearest target prioritizing champions. This means if you keep your frontliners between her and your backline, she will always taunt onto the front line, which isn't necessarily who she wants to be fighting. If Briar's also forced to use her E early, then retaunts, she can't end it early, which means you can drag her out of position or under tower if this happens. Finally, Briar has no base health regeneration, as mentioned before. This means that dots are exceptionally lethal against her. If you have Ignite or a Liandry's or a Demonic Embrace, she just kind of dies to those because there's no base health regeneration to offset the damage that she suffers from those abilities. Moving on to talk about ability-specific counterplay. I did want to touch on Briar's passive here. I know I don't normally talk about the passive, but I think this is important because it's worth knowing what it does for Briar. This, on top of healing Briar based on the pre-mitigation damage dealt, it also has a dot. Now, this dot does take time to stack up. It stacks up to 9 times, so a single stack of the dot isn't going to be that big of a deal, but it does mean that if she gets up to 9 times, you can take a fairly substantial amount of damage over time. So if you flash away on a sliver away from Briar, you may still die to Crimson Curse, regardless of whether or not you think you shouldn't have, right? So this also applies to her healing. The more stacks she has, the more she's going to be healing. If she's hitting multiple targets, stacking up a bunch, all of them at the same time, she's going to be healing for a lot more than if she just got into a fight, hit you one time, and then ran away. So if you're able to limit your exposure to Briar, she's not healing as much, and you're not taking as much damage. Briar's Q is a targeted stun that comes with an armor shred and a dash, which makes it quite potent if Briar can get into range, but she has to be in range to cast it because it's a targeted ability. She can't use it otherwise. Now, a lot of times what Briar's will do, because the W comes with a very small dash as well, Briar can W into range to Q on top of you, so do keep in mind that she has the option to do this. And her Q also, if she uses it on a minion or monster, removes the prioritization of her W on champions, right? It then says, okay, you used it on a minion, you are now focusing minions with your W's taunt. This means that if Briar's using it to clear a camp, for example, or she's using it to make sure she kills minions in lane, that her W will no longer prioritize you, and you can hit Briar for free without her being able to actually fight back. She's now used 2 cooldowns and not been fighting a champion with them, and then if she decides to cancel her W with her E, she's used a 3rd cooldown. There's a lot of issues that it runs into, but definitely something to keep in mind if you see Briar use her Q like that, or especially if you see her use her Q on like an epic monster like Drake, for example. She won't be able to turn around and fight you and without canceling her W, and her W is such a big steroid that it really weakens her ability to actually fight you back. Speaking of Briar's W, it is her bread and butter ability. If she does not have W available, she is quite weak. So if you see Briar use her W and you're able to start fighting her right as it ends, she really doesn't have very much she can do other than press E and pray. Like I said before, she self-taunts onto the nearest unit, and her W also gives her a mini Tiamat effect as well, so don't clump on top of Briar, since that just lets her stack her passive damage on everyone in the area effect as well. W also has a reactivation ability that resets her attack timer and does damage based on the target's missing health and heals her based on her missing health. This chomp is like crazy strong. I've hit people for like 600 damage and healed like half my health bar with the W reactivation. She gets it once per W, but it is on its own cooldown, so if she taunts and then retaunts immediately afterwards, she may not have it available, but it's certainly worth keeping in mind that if you haven't seen her use it yet on her W, she still has access to it, so don't get into that auto attack trade where you're like, oh, I'll definitely be able to out DPS Briar, because she'll probably bite you for your life savings, and then you'll be sad and die to the Briar. Briar's E is a channeled ability that isn't disrupted by CC, so don't be baited by thinking, oh, I can disrupt that. You can't. She'll keep channeling it regardless of whether or not you hit her with crowd control, and she gains 40% DR during the ability while healing up to 16% of her maximum health while channeling. This makes her deceptively tanky, so if she starts charging your screen, it may be wiser to simply get out of range instead of trying for the kill, because otherwise she gets the full charge, she knocks you back a good distance. If she knocks you into a wall, there's a stun and additional damage. This ability does like a really crazy amount of damage for no reason, so definitely try to avoid getting in the knockback, especially a knockback into a wall. It's usually easier to just say, I'll wait for you to stop channeling and then I'll kill you from there, because at that point you lose the DR, and even if you've healed a bunch of health, it may not be enough health. This is also how she stops her frenzy early, but because this is also her best defensive button, if you force her to use it, it'll end her primary steroid early, which gives you a shot at killing her immediately afterwards. Finally, let's talk about Briar's ultimate. This ability has an effectively global range. It's not technically true global. She can't kick it from her fountain into your fountain, but it is essentially a global ability. That said, the projectile is fairly slow moving, and it comes with both an auditory and visual warning. If you look underneath your champion's feet, you'll see sort of like a wispy, bloody type particle effect under your champion's feet until the projectile has passed. Keep an eye out for that, especially if you're playing with the volume muted. If Briar's going for cross-map snipes, you should have plenty of time to react, assuming there aren't any champion versus champion interactions happening at the same time, but also she may save it to try and use it as a secondary gap closer, using her WQ combo to get on top of you the first time, you open a gap, and then she kicks her R in order to follow you, so keep that in mind if she does still have it available. If Briar does hit a target, she goes unstoppable, which means you can't actually prevent her from dashing to her target, short of killing her during the sort of small wind-up time, and then she dashes to the struck target after a delay. You'll see who she hit and the area of effect of her ultimate, so you can be outside of the ult. She damages and terrifies everyone in the area of effect, except for the primary target. She only damages them, so do keep this in mind, that you can back off outside of the AoE until Briar lands, then you can go back in. This also means that her primary target isn't taunted, so you have the ability to respond immediately as Briar lands on top of you with any crowd control or damage that you may have at your disposal. Do keep this in mind. Everyone else are the ones who get terrified. After she casts this, she also gets an empowered Blood Frenzy that gives her even more movement speed, lifesteal, and AD, and it has an infinite duration, which is very powerful. That said, she is forced to taunt onto whatever target she hit with the ultimate. This means that if a frontliner tanked it, for example, you kind of don't care, right? If you're Rammus, for example, you're like, yeah, please, I want you to stay in your empowered Blood Frenzy while trying to kill me. But it also then means that if you can basically burst down Briar, you can force her to use her E, which then cancels that empowered Blood Frenzy, which then means a lot of her ultimate's value has been wasted, which is a very powerful version of counterplay to deal with Briar. This means that Briar's opening with her ultimate, just dump your damage onto her, force her to E as soon as possible, because then she doesn't really have her ultimate's availability. Finally, let's talk about some counterpicks. Briar has no shortage of counterpicks available, so don't worry about it. Lots of frontliners will give her fits. Malphite stacks armor and can remove her attack speed with a ground slam, which just all but invalidates her existence in a fight, and since most of her gap closing is just running at you, a seismic shard is actually a good way of keeping her at arm's length. Rammus stacks armor, can manually taunt her onto him instead of his allies, and has damage reflection. If he's got a Thornmail, Briar just kind of kills herself on Rammus while she's in her Blood Frenzy. Shen's W creates a dodge zone for allies in the area of effect, which means that Briar, who's all auto attack based, can't actually hurt anybody as long as they're in Shen's W. And Jax's Counter-Strike is very good for the similar reason. You just invalidate the W entirely, and then you punish her with a pretty big stun afterwards. Kayn is also a good pick, most specifically Shadow Assassin, because you have the ability to burst her down and force her to use her E early and then go inside her with Umbral Trespass. Briar's W really doesn't like Umbral Trespass. It has some really funky interactions with how that works, so you can basically press all your buttons, burst down Briar, go inside her to either avoid the E or to negate her W, and then pop out and press all your buttons again, and she just kind of dies to Shadow Assassin Kayn. Rost is okay in a Briar, but you have to worry about the fact that Briar is also sort of a sustained fighter, and I believe she actually beats Rost in the long run, so do keep that in mind. Assassins and Burst Mages don't necessarily work super well in a Briar due to her W2 healing and her E's damage reduction and healing, but bursting down Briar will force her to E early, and as we've talked about, this ends her Blood Frenzy early and therefore invalidates her existence in the middle of team fights. This is sort of especially true for champions that either don't need to close to melee, Burst Mages for example, or who can get back out of range quickly, Zed, because if Briar can't hit you, she can't heal. And if she's not healing, she's not actually a very durable champion. Briar tends to commit fully to a fight and basically say, I will sustain through this or I will die. And if you have the ability to say, there's nothing for you to hit, she can't sustain, and then she'll die. Varus, I think, is a very interesting pick against a Briar. He has on-demand Grievous Wounds, he has a skill shot ultimate that can CC Briar as she tries to run him down, and he can poke her down from afar with his Q or his E. Briar is super susceptible to poke. Any damage she takes, she has to go find minions or something to hit because she has no base health regeneration, so being able to poke out a Briar that you see prior to an engagement can be a very efficient way of counterplaying her. This goes for other poke champions like Xerath as well. Morgana's also a pretty decent pick here as well. She can line up a Q onto a taunted Briar and can black shield herself or an ally to prevent the Terrify on Briar's ultimate, which then lets two champions gang up on Briar immediately after she lands from her ult. And finally, Janna is pretty effective at peeling for any target that gets targeted by a Briar. Between her Q, her W, her R, she has a lot of ways of resetting the fight and forcing Briar to lose value. But anyways, those are my tips for helping to deal with Briar. You guys left to let me know in the comments what you think of your ability to deal with Briar, anything that you've seen in your own games or any specific counter picks that you've been seeing work out. I'd love to hear your comments down below. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.